Why is split screen gaming getting worse? In the early 2000s, when online console gaming started to take off, most multiplayer games had the option to play with 4-player split screen on the console, or you can jump online. And obviously, many games also had a local option. This made it so that, generally speaking, you and 4 other people could be using a console, while simultaneously playing with another console that 4 people were also playing on. It made for some amazing gaming sessions. Being able to play Halo Online when everybody shared a screen is a fresh memory in my mind, and likewise with taking 2 or 3 friends and going online in Call of Duty off your same console. In many games throughout these generations, you would be able to basically guarantee that each console would cover 4 players. So if a game could go up to 16 players, for example, that just meant that you needed 4 consoles. Now, in fairness, back in the day, the average age of gamers was much younger than it is today, so generally speaking, parents that weren't gamers were the ones who were buying the video games, which generally amounted to the single console household. There are more parts to this as well. Many people usually only had 1 or 2 TVs in their house, and console gaming was almost exclusively done on TVs back then instead of monitors. So all of these different factors generally amounted to people sharing their consoles with their siblings. Nowadays, many siblings obviously do still share their stuff, but it's a lot more likely for people to have their own console, instead of sharing it with the household. This is obviously very beneficial to the gaming industry. More consoles, more games, more money. And with more and more people buying their own console, and the natural evolution towards online gaming that's occurred over the past couple of decades, companies naturally began to focus less on the quality of the split screen or the local experience, because despite the fact that local gaming is still very much popular, since it's not nearly as common of the primary multiplayer experience as it used to be, companies can not only save on development costs by not optimizing the local experience, but they also get more sales because now the people that do want to enjoy the local experience to its fullest will naturally end up buying more consoles and more games. This isn't exclusive to Nintendo. Microsoft shifted away from the split-screen campaign experience, which was a staple of the Halo experience. And I'm sure there are many more examples throughout the industry. But from a Nintendo perspective, this was something that bothered me even before I started to go up against the Switch too. I remember this was a pretty common frustration with the Wii U. When playing Smash Bros., you were limited to only going online with yourself and 1 more friend. 2 people per console. If you were 3 people hanging out, they were out of luck. You couldn't jump online with your 2 friends and have a 4th join you. And since there was no 8-player mode online, you couldn't, for example, jump online with 4 of your friends and play against 4 other people. And obviously, you couldn't grab 6 friends and then join 2 more, etc. Now, when Ultimate came out, I was really hoping to be able to jump online for 3v3s or 4v4 along with your local friends, but they once again limited it so that if you're going online, you can only go as 2 people playing quick play on co-op. Now, in Smash Bros. Case, this was kind of an annoyance, but it wasn't that bad. At the end of the day, you could still play 8 players with a single console. And even if you had multiple consoles in the same room, you could connect them together and play 8 players across the 2 consoles. Obviously, this is with a LAN connection. I've never tested this out, but based off of a user that I saw online, you could hypothetically have 7 people on a single console and 1 person joining in with another console, locally. The point is that Smash Bros., a game that locally supports 8 players on a single console, allows you the option to customize your local experience across multiple switches. But again, this is only locally. Their online kinda stinks. I had held my breath going into Ultimate that the online experience with Smash Bros. Would be much easier to create rooms and be able to connect with multiple friends and maybe have 4 people from one Switch join in with 4 people from another Switch. But no, I think the Smash Bros. Online experience still kinda stinks. Very watered down and very straightforward. But shifting the discussion to Mario Kart, there was a whole other issue. On the Wii U, Mario Kart 8 capped off at 720p, but it gave you a steady 60 frames per second. That is, unless you were to play split screen, in which case the game seemingly had a drop off to 30 FPS. I say seemingly because the way that it actually worked was that the game would always render in 60 frames per second regardless of the mode. But due to the hardware limitations of the Wii U, it only updates half the screen at a time, specifically when playing 3 or 4 player split screen. So essentially, it's frame skipping in order to not slow down the Wii U. But all 60 frames are rendered and each frame is unique from the last. This at least is according to some modders that have broken down the game over the past decade. But basically, with a hypothetical stronger Wii U, you would just need a minor graphic pack adjustment, which would force every frame in 3 to 4 player split screen to refresh at the same time. Many people had hoped that this meant that when Mario Kart 8 Deluxe went to the Switch, you'd be able to view 4-player split screen of Mario Kart 8 in true 60 frames per second. Naturally, they didn't do that because, well, it's Nintendo. So what we got was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Nintendo Switch playing in 4 players at 30 frames per second, which has lasted until now. Now, many people notice that if you're playing 2-player split screen, you still get the 60 frames per second. So the workaround here is for somebody that prioritizes 60 frames per second, they would have to have 2 Switches and 2 copies of Mario Kart. Instead of 4 people playing on a single console, you'd split it up so that 2 people were on one console and 2 people were on the other. Which of course is great for Nintendo, that's more units sold, doubling the price of admission for the 4-player Mario Kart experience. Now, okay, let's say the average person is actually okay with 30 frames per second, but they want to play more than 4 players. Logically, you'd expect the experience to be similar to how it was in the early 2000s. Every console would get you 4 people. Mind you, all of this was available on the GameCube with Double Dash. And with Mario Kart Double Dash, you were still with 60 frames per second, even if you were playing 4-player split screen on 2 consoles that were locally connected, effectively giving you 8 screens across 2 GameCubes. This was over 20 years ago, and yet for some reason, even today, if you want to play Mario Kart 8 on the Nintendo Switch with more than 4 players, locally or online, you are limited to 2 people per Switch, for seemingly no reason. You could make the argument for online having to be 60 frames per second. I wouldn't buy into that argument, but fine, you can make that argument. But locally, 2 Switches are not enough to play 5 players, which means at minimum, for somebody looking to play more than 4 players on Mario Kart, you have to have 3 Switches. Which means if you were hanging out with 8 friends, for example, and you just finished playing 8-player Smash Bros, and one of your friends brought their Switch along with them with 4 controllers as well, those 2 Switches would not be enough to play 8 players. You would need 2 more Switches, which ultimately means that if you were having a party or you were hosting a tournament and you wanted to have 12 players, at minimum, that's 6 Nintendo Switches and 6 copies of Mario Kart, which, again, is phenomenal for Nintendo because as far as they're concerned, that's more people buying in. Because the people that prioritize these multiplayer experiences, whether they have a lot of families around them, they host a lot of game nights, they host a lot of tournaments, they're going to end up buying in. So it's a very easy example of Nintendo being lazy about things and benefiting from it. And for the end user, it's very frustrating and it's inconvenient. And this is not something that I'm frustrated in. There are forums beyond forums of people complaining about this. Imagine you had a Switch with 3 controllers and your friend came over with a Switch Lite. If you want to play 4-player Mario Kart, you wouldn't really be able to in any comfortable way. You couldn't do one person playing on the Switch Lite with 3 people on the big screen TV, which seems like it would be something logically set up for the user. The big excuse that I heard over and over again throughout this past decade was that this was being done because Mario Kart 8 at the end of the day was a Wii U game. You were limited to 30 frames per second because this was effectively a Wii U title. You couldn't play locally or online with more than 2 people per Switch because this was effectively a Wii U title. Mind you, the Wii U was at least, depending on the metric that you look at, as strong as the Xbox 360 and the PS3. The stuff that we're asking the Wii U to do for Mario Kart was being done a generation before that even on the Xbox and the GameCube. So while yes, the Wii U was the weaker software for the time, it was outdated compared to the PlayStation 4, not really the PS3. And that's not even considering all the amazing optimization that Nintendo can put into their first-party titles that they're building on their own first-party console. It's not like you're playing Sonic and All-Star Racing's Transformed on a Nintendo console, which, by the way, managed to run at 5 players on the Wii U using the gamepad as the 5th player, so you're able to do 5 players on a single console with 2 screens, and even then the frames only really started to drop in the flying sections, from a third-party company that was known to cut corners. So you expect me to believe that Nintendo couldn't figure out 2 Wii U's doing 8 players at 30 frames per second? I'm still not even convinced that they couldn't do 1 Wii U with 60 frames per second for 4-player split screen, but that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, basically that was a line that kept being spouted. Well, yeah, it's an outdated game. It's from the last generation. It's from the Wii U. The Wii U was too weak to handle this stuff, and when they brought it over to the Switch, God forbid they changed something that could potentially make them less money. So they kept it the same way. Now, keep in mind, part of the reason these terrible online practices were okay for the Wii U was largely because it was free. So for many people, they'd be thinking to themselves, yeah, I'm limited to the amount of people I can go online with, but at the end of the day, I'm not paying any money for online, so whatever. But then Nintendo started charging for it, and they didn't really improve the experience. So you were still getting the free experience, that being the low quality effort for online, but it cost money now. So it wasn't like you started paying for a service that was getting better. You were paying for a service that was just marginally better than it was on the Wii, let alone the Wii U. Conveniently, they tied it in with a few NES games. Obviously, they did the whole drip feeding thing, so you got a few more NES games as time went on. Eventually, you got the Super Nintendo, and of course, eventually they upped the price for the expansion pass, but that price was tied to the access towards classic games. So what Nintendo effectively ended up doing was forcing players that want to play online to subscribe to their catalog of classic games, and that was their way of justifying the payment for an online bad experience that should, by all accounts, still be free, because it feels like a free online experience. It feels worse than a free online experience in many cases. Now, going into the Switch 2, we have the launch of Mario Kart World. Mario Kart World is going to release exactly 11 years and 1 week to the day since Mario Kart 8 came out. And despite that, they didn't solve either of these two issues that were on the Wii U, that were even on the Switch. Based off the footage that you could see online, if you're playing split screen for anything more than 2 players, you're still knocked down to 30 frames per second. On a $450 device, with a game that costs $80, with technology that's meant to rival the PS4 at minimum and be pretty close to the PS5 if you're optimistic, we're meant to believe that Mario Kart World is this massive, amazingly huge, and technologically advanced title that when you're knocked down to 4-player split screen, you're still going to be tied to 30 frames per second. Mind you, the game is said to be able to run up to 1440p, and supposedly it's going to have a 120 frames per second mode. When you're docked, it'll drop down to 1080p, and the assumption is that during 4-player split screen, you'll still get that 1080p. Now, I'm wondering what that 120 FPS mode is going to look like. Are they going to let people online play with 120 FPS with racers that are only using 60 FPS? Because they shouldn't. At least that's the logic most of these Nintendo defenders have. Because anytime anybody said, why can't I just go online with 4-player split screen at 30 FPS and go against somebody that has 60 FPS, they all say that Nintendo wants an even playing field, so you shouldn't be allowed to go online with 30 FPS. And fine, then don't complain when they tell you that you can't go online with 120 FPS while somebody else is playing with 60 FPS. But even despite that fact, Nintendo has shown that the game can be adjusted accordingly for performance versus fidelity, depending on the type of console you're using and the amount of players that are playing. Because, similar to Mario Kart 8, once again, in Mario Kart World, if you wanted to play Mario Kart with more than 4 players, you would be required to have, at minimum, 3 Switches. So they gave you the same limitations from the Wii U, from Mario Kart 8 that came out in 2014. 4-player split screen is still limited to 30 frames per second, and playing more than 4 players, whether it's online or locally, requires at minimum 3 consoles. So once again, for the 3rd generation in a row, if you want to play 4-player Mario Kart with 60 frames per second, you have to buy 2 Nintendo Switch 2s. Minimum. And if you're okay with 30 frames per second, but you want to play 5 players or more, you have to buy 3 Nintendo Switch 2s. Minimum. Now, I'm just curious here. What was the limit? Let's pretend for a second that the reason why they won't let you play online with 4 people is actually because they want everybody to be at 60 FPS, which I don't believe is true at all, by the way. I think they're clearly limiting it just to sell more units for the people that actually want to play more than 4 players in the same room. But yeah, let's pretend that the 30 FPS is the reason why they won't let you go online with 3 friends. I'm wondering what the limit would have been in order to get us to be able to play 4-player split screen at 60 frames per second. You've already shown that the game can run at either 1440p or 1080p when you're playing handheld, and the game is rumored to be supporting up to 120 frames per second. So maybe you guys can tell me, what would we have to sacrifice in order to get 60 frames per second? 720p? Is that fair? I'd take that. But I mean, I'd be willing to go down to 480p if that meant I could play with 4 people online on the same console. Or, better yet, don't even offer the online option. Give me the LAN option. 480p, 60 frames per second, 2 Nintendo Switches, 8 players. Require me to use a wired connection from one Switch to the other if you must, because maybe the wireless is the reason there's an issue. Limit me to wired controllers even. Because apparently, over the past 20 years, many Nintendo fans, Specifically, those fans that will defend every single thing about Nintendo must legitimately believe that technology has not improved to the point where you can run 4-player split screen at 60 frames per second unless the controllers are wired and the connection between the consoles are wired and the resolution is limited to 480p. That's what I'm understanding here, that the leap from generation to generation of Mario Kart game to Mario Kart game is so massive that Mario Kart World specifically is like GTA 6 Forza Horizon levels of intense, that it must actually be impossible to be able to get 60 frames per second regardless of how much they dumb down the resolution. I'm sorry, that's bull. There is clearly one primary benefit to these limitations, and there are no more rooms for excuses. Specifically for Mario Kart, Nintendo is limiting what you can do locally, just like they did in the past, because they know it will inevitably lead to more sales for the people that want these features. And I say specifically for Mario Kart because they know that if any game could potentially get away with it, it's Mario Kart. It's the same reason they're charging $80 for Mario Kart. They view Mario Kart as the golden goose, and they know that people that are having hangouts will get extra games and extra switches, and all of the different game nights and all of the different tournaments and all of those different situations will end up seeing people inevitably buying more consoles, because it's Mario Kart, right? That's what you buy the multiplayer experience for. So it's just more greed from Nintendo at the end of the day. Like, that's the bottom line, right? I'm sure anybody that's made it this far into the video is not surprised that I view Nintendo as a very greedy corporation. They're clearly being greedy and just trying to find more people to buy their overpriced stuff. Now, I do have a hot take, and this is semi-related. I think Nintendo is drastically overestimating the power of Mario Kart. I think for a vast majority of buyers of Mario Kart is a game that they bought because they bought a Nintendo console. They didn't buy the Nintendo console for the Mario Kart. You bought the Switch for Zelda, for Odyssey, even for Smash Brothers, for Animal Crossing. And because you bought the Switch, you went and also bought Mario Kart, because if you have a Nintendo console, you always get Mario Kart. Mario Kart sales are as high as they are not because of the hardcore Mario Kart fans, is because the success of Mario Kart is directly proportional to how many casual gamers they can get to buy into their console. For the Switch too, I think this is the first time in Nintendo's history they're making Mario Kart the primary focus. They're saying buy the Nintendo so you can get Mario Kart, forgetting that most of these people already have a Nintendo with Mario Kart. And there's a good chance this will work, but I don't know that Mario Kart is the system seller that we're being led to believe it is. And I know that sounds crazy, but I did say this was a hot take. But I think Nintendo is drastically overestimating how powerful Mario Kart is. Worthy of the price increases to the console, worthy of the $80 price tag, something that's not normal in the industry at all. It seems like in their mind, Mario Kart is popular, therefore everyone's gonna buy the Switch too, and we can do whatever we want. And I just don't think this is the reality. Naturally, we'll have to see how this goes. I am interested to see what the lineup looks like for the remainder of 2025, however, because while Prime 4, Kirby Air Riders, and a Donkey Kong game do sound amazing to a Nintendo fan, I just don't think you can count on any of those the way you could count on a Breath of the Wild or an Odyssey. Although, I guess, lucky for the Switch 2, they are selling you the definitive Breath of the Wild experience for $90, so there's that. We'll see. I just wanted to shed some light on how dumb I thought it was that we're still limiting the split-screen Mario Kart experience 11 years since the last one came out. So, thanks again for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.